Hey everyone, last time we showed you about the ways of how to do smoothing groups, which is very crucial, especially since we're gonna be using this as our main blockout for our model. So the rest of these tutorials is basically about showing you the whole process from start to finish of what a regular asset would look like in terms of the art workflow. So in terms of my personal workflow, what I would usually do is I would use my same blockout mesh as also as my base mesh for my low poly and high poly. So here you go. So as you can see, there's multiple purposes of a blockout mesh. A blockout mesh can be used for your low poly. You could modify it more the way as how you modify your high poly. Your high poly could change a lot more and evolve more in terms of shape or silhouette, or you could just add more secondary surface details. Usually I'd like to stick around, when it comes to blocking, around 70 to 80% of my final silhouette. It helps me get a grip of what I actually need in terms of shape, so that all I have to do is just worry about the surface details, the secondary shape, or the complementary shape that's really possibly that it could just be baked in the surface as part of a normal map. Now, we all have different approaches of how we could approach creating a high poly or a low poly, but for me, I would usually use the same thing and just try to iterate a design. Possibly later on, if my high poly ever evolves to a different shape, then I could just, it's gonna be going to be a very minimal minor adjustment. Without further ado, it's basically showing you the fastest way of doing things. So this is my personal way of doing things. So today I'll be showing you guys two ways that you can boost your workflow. So I'll be showing you the quality way of importing it to ZBrush properly with a proper pipeline workflow, and I'll be showing you the fastest way that you could do so. So I'll show you the fastest and also the quality way. So it's more of like trying to show you how you could possibly approach this for ZBrush preparation. So since we'll be importing this in ZBrush, it will have to be subdividable. Thinking that this object will be used, as a ZBrush model, right? So when you try to sculpt on it, it has to be subdividable. The thing with this one is that if you're going to smooth this or subdivide this in ZBrush, it will more likely morph into a gulp of mess, as you can see here. Now, there are two ways that I'll be showing you, which I'll be showing you later on how to import this bare minimum as this, and I'll be showing you the proper way. So let's start with the proper way. So let me just hide this and turn this on. Okay. So by the way, to zoom in, you just have to press Control spacebar, so that you can zoom in the whole Maya can basically expand as itself to be a solo. You get what I mean. So right here that I'm showing you right now, this is basically a way to prepare your model for ZBrush. Although we can always try to put our low poly aside, as what you saw earlier. So earlier we have a preparation already. Since earlier we were trying to show you the fundamentals of smoothing groups, this could already act as our low poly as for the moment. But since we could use this, also possibly use this for our high poly later on, which I'll be showing you. For now, for this quality method, I'll be showing it to you as our low poly, since we'll be using this for our low poly bake. at least for the moment, in demonstrating you how to do this. Going back in here, so the way I prepared this is that I had to make sure that this model is subdividable. To do that, you have to know how to do hard surface. So as you can see here, as you notice, that my model has extra edges or extra supporting edges so that it can support when it collapses. So when I try to smooth my object, it actually still retains the shape despite smoothing it, but at least having a much more higher quality when it comes to subdividing it. So as you notice, it's much more clear, it's much more crispier. You can add more edges so that it can support the shape even more. The possibilities are endless. Cool. So ideally, what I would say is this is already prepared for ZBrush. So I'll show you a demonstration how to do this. So say example, you have a cube, 2 cubes in fact. So naturally what a cube does is that when we press 3, it actually collapses itself as a ball. Since it does not have any supporting edges, it just collapses itself as a ball because it does not have any supporting edges to support its extra weight in terms of collapsing. To do this, all you have to do is just add extra edges on each and every single segment, making sure that every single edge and face has the same number. So 1, 2, 3 face on each side. So in this case, it could support itself in terms of collapsing. So when we subdivide this, it becomes a smooth model, which we could use to import in ZBrush and divide it in Dynamesh. Now we can't use this straight out of the bat because it's not ready, but we still could use this in ZBrush, but we still have to use the creasing method, which I'll be showing later. Now I'll be importing this in ZBrush. So since we already know what hard surface is, I'll be importing this in ZBrush, and since this is already prepared, we could already subdivide this and it still looks good. We already prepared how it looks good. Now we can just import this in ZBrush and see how it goes. Okay, I'm gonna export this out, and I'm going to put this in my desktop and call this gear high quality. The reason why I'm showing you this way, so that you will realize that both methods has its own advantage. So we have the fast workflow and we have the quality workflow. Oh, my bad. Export selection. Okay. I'll call this base HP quality. Alright, export selection. So as you can see already, this is already, like I said earlier, it's already ZBrush prepped. So no matter how we divide it inside later in ZBrush, it's not gonna collapse badly. So let's go ahead and proceed to ZBrush. Okay. Now let's try to import this wonderful mesh in our ZBrush. Let's go ahead and find that wonderful thing. So let's go ahead and go for there you go. Press OK. Aha, there you go. So if your program is, or if your window is as small as this in ZBrush, all you have to do is basically just uh, resize your document. So just go here to document and make sure that you press new window and it expands for you. Let's try it again. Edit, and here we go. So naturally, the natural tendency that we do in ZBrush, once we get into ZBrush, is we usually divide it, right? So when we divide it, we already have a smooth, clean mesh that we can start detailing with, or maybe add more damage to it, and possibly anything that we could possibly get our hands on in terms of, you know, adding extra details or quality to our model. Let's say chipping. If this were metal, there would be scratches, there would be chipping, and probably some chipped out parts. But ideally, this is how it usually is. So, you know, what I would do naturally from here is I would directly go ahead and start dynameshing this. The reason why I would divide this is because we can't just go ahead and dynamesh it without dividing it. Not because if you think about it, dynamesh basically retains all the details, even if it's low poly, in the exact state. So if you go back and delete, if you go back to low res, actually let's just go back in our low res. There you go. There you go. So if we try to dynamesh this, it's going to dynamesh the model and still retain it without collapsing. So as you notice, the low poly shape has, you know, the low poly shape is still being retained as is, you know, and that's not something that we're looking for, because, you know, when we're dealing with high poly, we're making sure that the model is at its best quality. So in here, even if we dynamesh this, it's still preserving the low poly quality of our model, which we don't really want, and it gets harder to even smooth this or work with, and there will be a lot of adjustments. So what I would do is I would divide this first so that I don't retain any of these low poly model look. And when I divide it to something as smooth as this, then I can dynamesh it and then I can sculpt. So this is usually my workflow of how I would do, how I would approach something in ZBrush, is that I would go ahead, especially for props, I would go ahead and do a mock-up blockout model and making sure that it is on, you know, in good quality shape before I import it to ZBrush, that it is subdividable. Other than that, you know, it's, you know, I use ZBrush more of for quality checking, making sure that, you know, the model is in its purest quality, and just making sure that, you know, I keep polishing it over and over again. And that's usually my use for ZBrush when it comes to hard surface props. But it would vary depending on the thing that you're creating. It could vary for clothes, it could vary for other things. But for many objects, this is usually my my workflow for props, if we're dealing with really good quality props. So in here, this is basically the time that I get to divide it. So I'm going to go ahead and dynamesh this thing. Since I already finished divided, I'm going to dynamesh it again. So wait. Alright, now we got our model around 500K, which is good. Now this is a sculptable surface. The reason why that we have to dynamesh it, because we can't just go ahead and sculpt it directly. If we go back to the part that we did not really dynamesh it, so if we go back here, so as you notice that every single polygon that you see in this surface is not equally spreaded. So when you try to sculpt it, say example, right? The downside of this is that the polygons are not equally spreaded, therefore there will be some pixelation that is going to happen when you're sculpting on top of a surface that's not equally spreaded polygons. So what what Dynamesh does is what we usually do. That's why we Dynamesh, is that we're trying to sculpt on top of a very polished state model and try to improve from there on. So if you're using a divided version, the polygons isn't equally spreaded throughout the surface. Therefore, you're going to suffer a lot of issues throughout the process. And that's not what we really want to aim here, because other than that, it's going to have some really low quality model breaking through, and you would see these pixeling going on in your normal maps, which we don't want. So that's why we always try to Dynamesh it. So the process is, I would go to ZBrush, I would go divide it, and I would Dynamesh it, and then I'll start my sculpting afterwards. So I'm going to undo this, and then making sure that I am at the Dynamesh stage. Am I at Dynamesh stage? No, not yet. I'm going to Dynamesh it again. Alright, cool. We're going to wait for it. Awesome. Now we got a equally spreaded polygons throughout the surface. So as you notice, every single polygon is equally spreaded in the surface, and this is something ideal that you could sculpt on, not a divided object. Great. Now, my usual intention, sometimes I would usually start from very low cluster polygon count, like 300k, and move slowly higher and higher and higher. I usually do that because I'm trying to either, number one, make sure that every single object has quality on it, and making sure that the shape is in the right shape. I always try to always try to prioritize silhouette first over anything, because silhouette is really important, and if you don't master that, then everything collapse over. So silhouette is king. So once you get the silhouette right, then you focus on the secondary shape, which is the complementary shapes, the surface details. Then you go on to the very littlest things, then polishing. So that's always been the workflow for any assets that I've worked on in the AAA industry. Alright, so I'm going to start adding some wear and tear. So I usually do this pretty often when I'm dealing with metallic props, or anything that possibly even engine parts. It's very valuable. Adding some wear and tear, get some story in there. This is really the part, in the process where you're starting to put story on your work, which is very important. Great. Maybe you could also try to explore other brushes. If you have any brushes as well, you can try exploring that as well. So I do provide the team as well with some brushes that they need. So in this case, I don't have the metal brush that I need so far, so I'm just gonna have the wear and tear and chipping that you would usually see on very used car engine parts. Now I don't know what this is exactly, but for this sake of the example, please do continue to follow. Now always try to put thought on where those wear and tear is, and ideally you always have to think about how it happened. Maybe maybe it fell into the floor several times, or maybe it's just that or maybe it's just it has some friction or burning rate to it. That's why it got chipped. There's so many things that you could possibly add in the surface, and it's really up to you how you add those things. You could continue to add more details or even surface details if you wanted to, but in this case I just have to keep it short so that you guys generally get the idea of which which workflow are you going to choose. But if you're always in a rush and you have to deliver a certain quality all the time, I would use the fast workflow. I wouldn't use this since it will take more time, especially since you're a beginner. Great. So let's say that I'm happy with this. I got all my details. I got I got everything I need. Then I'll just have to proceed on the next stage. So let's go. So I'll call this as gear HP underscore gear quality. Now the beauty about having to manually do the hard surface work in Maya is that you're utilizing all your you're utilizing all your bevels in the right way. Bevel is king when it comes to hard surface. So if you think about it, you can control the smoothness of each and every single bevel in the surface. Therefore, you have more control of all of the things that goes to this object rather than the next workflow that I'll be showing you. So great. Now let's bake. Oh, but before baking, I would need to unwrap that model first. Alright, Rhizome. Since we'll be using our old smoothing groups model as our low poly, what I would do is I would import that here and get that unwrapped. So if I go to okay, here you go. Where was that? Base, quality, HB. Okay, there you go. So the beauty about this workflow is that you're using this model for one as your low poly and second as your high poly. But if you were going to use this model for cinematic, I would suggest unwrapping the ones that you have here because this is subdividable. But if you're not using it, I don't see how it's necessary. I would actually, it's not this model, my bad, that's my mistake. The model that we are looking for right now, it's not the subdivided version, because as you see, there is a lot of extra edges that we're not even going to use. So we don't need that exactly. So what we need though is the most optimized one is basically this one that does not have that much polygons to it, and just optimize it even more if you have any. Okay, so here's what you look for when you're trying to optimize for your low poly. If you ever have any edges that does not even make a difference in shape, remove it. If you don't have any of those, then the better. Anything that does not have any shape differences or any contribution to the silhouette, just get rid of it, so that you could save a lot of time in terms of trying to make it right. So in this case, I have this as my final low poly. So for my high poly, what I would do is I'm going to export this out. And I'll call this LP underscore gear. Now I'm going to go ahead. I usually use Rhizome because it's much more convenient when it comes to UV unwrapping. So So I'm gonna go ahead and find the LP underscore gear. There you go. So let's go ahead and unwrap that. So as you can see, it's really just, if you double click, it's just like in Maya, you double click it, you can cut it. So this is the convenience that I have here, and that's why I chose this over regular Maya UV unwrapping. Now the tip here, guys, is that you have to be very careful when it comes to unwrapping. Number one, you always have to make sure that where the hard edge is, that is supposed to be where the part that you're supposed to cut. You're not going to cut where the smooth edge is. So in this case, we're going to cut it properly where the hard edge is, and making sure that we have a seam cut so that it unwraps properly. We cut this one, making sure everything is clean. And if you if you select this edge and hold shift, it follows your mouse cursor, which is a beauty because it saves a lot of time from selecting manual edge that you can't select or double click as an edge loop. So this is the beauty. Now I'm just going to cut this double. So as much as possible, the more islands that you cut, the better, so that it's so that UVs are much more optimized as possible and as clean as possible. So like I said, I usually cut on the areas where the hard edge is so that I don't get any edging artifacts. So I'll demonstrate to you later what it looks like with the edge artifact on it. So just drag this and then cut. See? Look at that. That is a beauty. Or you can actually do this instead. See? It cuts the whole thing. Saves you a lot of time. There you go. So you can double click that one and cut it, and you can also select this segment and then cut it. It's much more faster that way. Alright, double click this again, cut, no. Now you don't have to do this for every single object. It's just that, for us, when it comes to hard surface, it always matters when, it always matters that, where the hard edge is it's supposed to be where it's supposed to cut, so that I don't get any of those weird edge artifacting. So I'll show you one. I'll just leave probably one edge that's not unwrapped properly. So I would unwrap this like how I would used to. I wouldn't cut any edge here and just unwrap as like what other normal 3D artists would. So say example, I'll leave it like that. Alright, so that's usually the case, right? So I'm just gonna cut this, maybe cut this in the back so that I can hide it. There you go. And I'll leave that, and let's do a comparison later. So I'm gonna cut that, cut that, cut that, cut that, and keep cutting. There you go. Now it's not 100% selected, so you have to be very careful sometimes, because there are a lot of a lot of instances that it doesn't get cut properly, like this one or this one. So you have to be very careful when selecting these parts. actually, so it's not really like all of it that's being cut properly or effectively during that time. So I have to make sure that it's fully cut. Alright, this might take time and gets tedious, but it'll be worth the wait. Oh, that's our example. Okay. Great. Okay. Let's keep going, guys. Alright, that's a good cut right there. Really selected everything. Hell yeah. That's a good cut again. Another one. Alright, looks like everything is looking great. Just making sure that we're not missing any edge. Alright, sounds good. So now I'm gonna unwrap this. Now what I would do smartly is I would cut this just 1/4 and just basically utilize the whole thing, because what we have right now is we unwrap the whole gear. But if you're going to unwrap it for, let's say, as in AAA, what you would do is just basically just take 1/4 of a repeating model and just unwrap that, and just everything goes away later on, and once you baked it, then you can just try to reassemble everything back. So I'm going to go and unfold this. Now everything is unwrapped properly. Save this. Now let's go back and go to rhizome. Substance. So in this case, we're using Substance Painter to unwrap. I mean, we're using Substance Painter to bake. There you go. So I'll be back on another episode.